Good afternoon. I hope you are all safe and well. I'm delighted to see you all, and I'm grateful that you have joined us for our fourth Open in Emergency event. I want to say first that this event is being recorded and will be made available on the Center for Medical Humanities website in the near future. I want to thank again the Office of Inclusive Excellence, whose generous funding has made this series, including this event, possible. I want to welcome back Dr. Mimi Cook, who has curated this year-long series. Mimi, can you give a wave to your fans? I also want to thank the center staff for their excellent work in making today's and all of our events possible. Sam Carter, Joanne Jamora, and Amanda Swain. So thank you to the three of you. Before I turn this over to Shana, I want to announce that we will be distributing the Open in Emergency Kit on Wednesday, March 17th and Thursday, March 18th from 1 to 3 p.m. The Center for Medical Humanities will follow up with you after this event for anyone interested in picking up a hard kit from campus that day while supplies last. If you would like a PDF copy of Open in Emergency, please email us at medicalhumanities@uci.edu. Also, please stay tuned for some exciting events for spring quarter, including our last Open in Emergency event for the year, featuring Kai-Cheng Pham and Dr. Mimi Cook. I am so pleased to welcome today Shana Bulhan Haydock, who studies and teaches at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. They are a candidate in the MFA program for poets and writers, and they are also pursuing a graduate certificate in feminist studies. Previously, they studied critical social thought at Mount Holyoke College. Shana grew up mostly in India, but they have been living in Western Massachusetts for more than a decade now. They recently won an Academy of American Poets Prize selected by Bianca Stone. Their creative work has appeared in Meridians, Smoke and Mold, the Asian American Literary Review, and other publications. For more information, please visit their website, www.cruxate.com. Welcome, Shana, and thank you for sharing with us your workshop.
Hi everyone. I'm so glad to be here, so grateful for this opportunity and very excited to converse with all of you. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously on Zoom, things are a little awkward sometimes, but I'm getting used to this new format, and I'm just really excited to see what all of you have to say and think and write. And of course, thank you so much, Jim, Mimi, Joanne, Sam, Lawrence also. I mean, so many people, made this happen for me and with me, and that is really amazing. So yeah. Okay, so I made a presentation that I'm gonna link in the chat. And you can all access it, as you wish. I'm not going to be going over everything in the presentation. I'm hoping this can be more, well, a workshop format, but I will at times be sharing my screen. And yeah, I mean, hopefully we can kind of go back and forth a little bit, but basically the presentation is there for you to reference. And yeah, so I have various notes that that I've listed in the speaker notes section of the Google Slides presentation that you can also look at if that's helpful for you. My goal is to make this event as accessible as possible, and yeah, I've included image descriptions also in the notes if that's helpful. So yeah, let's see how that goes. Yeah. So as per the description of this event, we'll be talking today about what it means and feels like to be considered wrong in interpersonal relationships, crazy, deviant, or just in some way considered to be doing something wrong, being something wrong, being too much, being toxic, being all of these words that I think we throw around a lot in our discourse, just like in talking to each other, or especially if we're interested in social justice issues, we might think about these issues even more, I guess, with a kind of collective history of trauma and what it means, especially in marginalized communities like queer communities, communities of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. We're kind of interested in like what makes us wrong, but also how do we put, how do we call each other wrong in ways that reinforce systems of oppression. And so that's kind of the framing that I'm starting from. I'm thinking about these kind of intersecting communities, queer, BIPOC, disabled communities. And I am really interested in what experiences all of you may have had in terms of in terms of being referred to as crazy or wrong. I'm also interested as a writer and artist in how we can address these kinds of issues creatively. And so because of that, we'll have a couple of writing exercises in this workshop and we'll discuss them. And I invite anyone who feels comfortable to share. I'll talk about that in a moment. So I just want to quickly go over also a brief explanation of terms. So as the workshop title is Crazy, Sick, Queer, right? Navigating interpersonal relationships. And I use this language very purposefully because both as a reclaiming strategy, I'm interested in like what happens as marginalized people when we reclaim slurs, when we reclaim words that are used against us. I'm also, I didn't include this in the title, but I am also interested in how as queer, disabled, sick, crazy people who are also people of color, how these things intersect, and especially how madness or ideas around disability and health are constructed within a very white and Western framework. So there's a lot to say about that, but the point is that there's kind of a history behind using these terms and reclaiming them. There's reasons why we might do that as people who have these marginalized identities. And so I invite you all in this workshop to think about not only like when you have, when you've been maybe treated as wrong, crazy, mad, sick, toxic, strange, too much, but also like what happens if you shift the gaze? What happens if you ask questions about, why you're being called those things or why you may have called other people those things? What happens if we think about, the structures, larger structures in society of individualism, of these norms that tell us that we can't be too dependent, that we can't want too much, that that we have to be these separate individuals. What if we question those norms? What if we think about what would it mean to craft relationships with each other that are more mutual, that are where we help each other heal and grow? And so that's kind of like the framework of this whole workshop. But you're welcome to look at my notes in the presentation I linked if you want more details about these specific terms. I also just want to say that, since we are talking about, we're talking about intense things. We're talking about mental health, disability. We're talking about being labeled and stigmatized. So a lot of intense things might come up. And so if any of you need to leave or take a break or anything like that, you're absolutely welcome to do that. And I hope that you can also feel free to, turn your video on and off as you choose, or not at all. That's totally fine as well. So yeah. Does anyone have any kind of questions about the framing of this workshop? Anything you want to ask before I go on?
May I interject and say you can feel free to use the chat or to unmute yourself to ask the question.
Absolutely, whatever feels comfortable for you. Okay, so let's try to make this a little more concrete, right? So on the second slide of my presentation, I have some quotes from this really wonderful young adult novel that that I read a few years ago, and it really stuck with me. It's called OCD Love Story by Corey and Haydock. And it was really heartbreaking and amazing at the same time, and really wonderful for me to discover, because I have OCD, not the pretty kind, which is something the book talks about a lot. And yeah, I mean, we could go into the history of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and there's a lot to say about that. But some of the quotes from this book, I feel like they really touch on this theme of feeling too crazy in interpersonal relationships. And I'm just going to read out a couple of them, and you can refer to my slide if you like. But yeah, so okay. Sometimes I wish more than anything that I had an entirely different kind of OCD that would keep me clean and pretty and presentable. Another one is, I close my eyes and make a wish that I'll stop having OCD so that I can be a decent friend again. If I want it badly enough, hopefully it will come true. I just don't want to hurt anyone. Then the narrator is talking about a boy they're in love with. And they say, if I cared about him, I'd tell him to get the hell away from me, because I am the most toxic person I know. I am the crazy one. And then later, he's gone. He didn't consider staying for even one extra second once he saw who I actually am. And obviously, there's a lot going on in the story. I really invite you to read this book if you haven't. But I feel like these quotes, they kind of, yeah. Mimi just said that it was heartbreaking in the chat. Yeah, I feel like these quotes really kind of get to the heart of like what it means to feel and be told also that you are wrong, that something about you, a disability, a mental illness, a neurodivergence. Just for clarification, neurodivergence means any kind of mental, cognitive, developmental, intellectual state that diverges from norms of like mental health, and also neurology. That's why neurodivergent. Anyway, so the point is that people who are neurodivergent, people who are mad, crazy in the reclaimed sense, people who are dealing with mental illness, often really struggle with this feeling, right? This internalized feeling of wrongness, but also being constantly told by society that they're doing things wrong. And sometimes we have to learn coping mechanisms. Sometimes we have to, figure out ways to interface with society and ways to hopefully feel better in ourselves. But I guess the question I'm asking is, why are we so quick to label anything that's outside of the norm or any kind of need or dependence as crazy, as wrong? Why do we treat people with mental illnesses like they need to hide them away or fix them? Why does the boy in this story leave? Just as a spoiler, he doesn't leave forever, which is great. But anyway, like what is happening for the narrator here? And so I'd like to invite you all to think about these quotes, and just do some journaling for yourself. And so the journaling exercise is basically, do any of these quotes speak to you? And once yeah, you can brainstorm that if you like, but basically think about, what does it mean to be a decent friend or lover? And are there ways that you felt like you're not that, or that you're the toxic person, or inevitably wrong? What do you do with that? How do you cope? So yeah, so basically it's like anything. I mean, you can choose any of these questions. I just put a bunch together, but you can approach this however you like. And I'm going to share a link to a Google Doc. And once you've spent, a few minutes journaling for yourself in whatever location feels comfortable to you, feel free to, if you feel comfortable, copy and paste anything that you'd like to share with everyone. And then after about 5-7 minutes or so, we'll come back, and anyone who wants to share in the chat or audio, video more about what they wrote can do so, and then we can kind of talk through it and talk about, like, what have you been through? What does it mean? And absolutely, I should copy and paste the questions in the chat. Yeah, okay. Okay, so does that make sense? Does everyone kind of know what we're doing? Any questions? Okay. I'm also going to do this exercise. So, okay, come back soon. Um, okay. I just want to check in. I know people are still copying and pasting and writing, and please continue to do that. But I would like to also take a moment, to talk about, or take some time to talk about what we're writing. So I hope you can all see my screen okay. I decided that, sharing this Google Doc will be a good way to go over things. And I just want to say that just from what I'm reading already, I am just so, I don't even know the word for it. It's like this mix of like heartbreak and relatability and just, just this strong sense, like I feel what you're all saying, and yeah. So I'm wondering, does anyone want to, it's totally optional, but does anyone want to share their responses or expand on them, like either over audio or video? Totally fine if not, but if you want to, feel free to jump in.
And let me invite, if people want to respond, they can also use the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you want to ask questions or anything like that, feel free. Well, maybe I hope this is okay. But maybe I'll read a couple of the responses, a few of them on this Google Doc, and I'll try to respond. And if any of you want to jump in at any point, please feel free. Okay, so this was, I think, the first thing I read in response to what does it mean to be a decent friend or lover. Someone wrote, oftentimes I feel like being the decent friend means self-erasure. Another person wrote self-sacrifice, and then I become a people pleaser, forget myself. And this is just so sad, but I also understand, like it seems like in our society, we're simultaneously told to put other people first and totally forget ourselves, and also told to have this like self-actualized individual self who doesn't need anyone. And I feel like these two ideas kind of like they go together, but they create this dissonance, right? Because on the one hand, you're supposed to be, you know, um, you're supposed to be so strong and so, assured in yourself. You're supposed to be able to work and have a great, living space and great relationships with neighbors, roommates, teachers, co-workers, whoever. You're not supposed to need anyone too much, but then if other people need you, you're supposed to be there for them. And you're supposed to be perfectly nice and polite and kind and all of that. And where's the space in that for, for moments when you're not okay, when you might be breaking down, and that could be related to disability or illness or neurodivergence, but it could also just be anything. It could be anything about being human, which of course, it's this vast expanse of experiences. And so if we are defining, being a person, being a decent friend, but also largely being a person as this weird dissonance of self-actualization and self-erasure, like what does that do to us? Why is it like that in this world? You know, and I really love this question. What does it mean to deconstruct the concept of decency? Why is this it? I love that question. And if whoever wrote it wants to expand on it, I would love to hear, but totally your choice.
Yeah, wait, can you hear me?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, well, you should come in here. Well, okay, yeah, I feel like it was really interesting to like read what does it mean to be a decent, like just like thinking of the word decent and like I don't know, I feel like it was like why is decency what we're striving for? Like I feel like there should be like and I think this is a great question to ask at the beginning of this workshop also, but it just made me think of like what do you want out of a relationship more than like self-sacrifice and like erasure? Like what would it mean for you to like be able to like see yourself beyond a, like being just a decent friend and like what is the like what are the connotations of the word decent and decency and what does it mean for like your idea of like what you deserve and like what the people in your life deserve too.
Yeah, wow, thank you. That no, I love this because you're asking these really important questions about yeah, about decency. But also like I think what you're speaking to, it makes me think at least about how decency is constructed in this very like whitewashed Western way. Like in society, for example, the idea of I don't know if you've experienced this, but where I live, there are a lot of white liberals, and there are a lot of people who are like superficially nice and kind, and could be said to be decent, civil. Um, but when you really investigate it, they're not actually there for people, or they only act in the way they think they're supposed to act, which I think we're all kind of conditioned to do. And you know, uh, if you actually need something, that's again, it's not okay because you're supposed to be self-actualized. But it's just, I don't know, it just feels like this very like almost like Puritan construction, right? This idea that if we're not kind of almost pretending to each other and upholding this sense of being proper social beings, then we're wrong, you know. Then if we voice discomfort, if we say actually there's something wrong in this society, actually there's something wrong in our lives, actually you know, we're dealing with generational trauma, we're dealing with racism, we're dealing with ableism, you know, discrimination against all kinds of marginalized people in society. If we actually say that out loud, then it disrupts that facade. It makes it really, it does, yeah, like you're saying, it calls into question what is decency. You know, and what is it about those of us who are too unruly, too queer, too you know, too much, basically, yeah, too non-white, too crazy, ill, whatever. What is it about us that disrupts this norm? And is there something to value in that? Maybe, you know. So thank you for sharing that, because I think it's really a good point. And I also just want to say, like somebody else, you know, shared, I define being a decent friend or lover as someone who is respectful of your boundaries and communicates well enough with you within the closeness you have with them. And I think this is also really interesting because you know, um maybe this is about like agency. Maybe it's about being able to define for ourselves what our boundaries are, and you know, and for being able to figure out what does closeness mean, or what closeness can we trust versus what closeness are we just kind of forced to assume. And so I guess I'm curious about like what would it mean to be able to define that respect, that boundaries, to figure it out together in a relationship. And yeah, I don't know. I just anyway, I have so many thoughts in response to everything, and I just want to say, like, all these examples of like feeling just let down, you know, having popular people in school just be like, oh, I wasn't calling you, like, and that's just such a sad moment, and I relate to that a lot. And yeah, like this internalized sense of guilt and feeling like you're asking too much, just, you know, having to prove, having like just not being able to cope with feeling broken, like all of that. I mean, it's just so intense. And I love this also. I wish people knew how exhausting navigating life, academia, whatever, with a chronic illness can be. I wish people knew how much this affects my capacity to be present. Absolutely. I think about this all the time as a disabled and chronically ill graduate student, and I keep wishing it would get better, but I'm not sure it does. And I know that's not exactly a popular thing to say, that it doesn't really get better, but I don't know what else to say. So yeah, and it's like this sense of like hyper awareness of that wrongness. You know, like yeah, these other people's words, actions, silence can shatter me in a flash. Someone wrote. Absolutely, it's devastating. Does anyone want to like say anything more before we move on? Anything else? I wish we had time to really like get into all of this even more, because there's so much here. There's just thank you for being vulnerable. It means a lot. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, I feel like it's helpful to just get these feelings out. And that's kind of why I wanted to start the workshop this way, because I think what before we figure out, I don't think this workshop is about figuring out things really totally, but I think that in our lives, before we try to figure out how to cope with feelings of alienation, we need to express them. And a lot of the time we don't have the space to do that. So I really wanted to try to create a small space to do that. So I was thinking, maybe to further concretize things, I came up with an example of a relationship where two people are having a lot of conflict. And I'll share my screen for this because I think it might be helpful visually to look at things. So this is slide 4. Let's see. Right. Okay. So yes, I'm just gonna make sure I get my notes. Okay. So maybe you can relate to this example, maybe not. I've thought about a lot of experiences in my own life, observations, and that kind of goes into what I've set up here. But basically, like, what if we imagine a couple, right? Anna and Bismeet, a queer interracial couple. In this couple, Anna is a white upper middle class person who comes from a nuclear family, small, wealthy, white town, has always kind of had that economic and social security, hasn't really been around a lot of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, except when they were in service positions for her and her family. And so, she's very, very insular life, right? And now she attends a prestigious university where it's also a similar kind of town, a college town, but so maybe a little more diversity, but still very much, the kind of social mores she grew up with. However, she does struggle with depression. Her sister struggled with cancer for years, and her family was just like burying it, trying not to talk about it. Especially after her sister became well again, it was like, oh, it never happened. So there's this sense of a lot is hidden in her life and her family, and she struggles with that. Okay, and then we have Bismeet. Oh, sorry. Okay, then we have Bismeet. And she grew up a few hours away from Anna, also attends the same prestigious university on scholarship though. She has a very different background. She's a mixed race woman of color, South Asian and Latinx, grew up in a working class city facing gentrification. So she grew up around a lot of people of color, but there was always this kind of fractured sense of community, like both very strong and close-knit, but also things were constantly perilous. People would lose their jobs and their homes very easily. So yeah, she comes to the same university as Anna and is having a lot of issues with culture clash, with microaggressions around racism, classism, all these things. And so she's rightfully very upset about that. So these two people come together and they fall in love, as unlikely as that seems. And it's not actually that unlikely. I've had similar experiences in my life, but anyway, it happens. And you know, things are complicated. They're really intense. I made this slide to kind of like all these words over images to kind of display what it means to have chaos in a relationship. And you know, and it's really hard actually, because I'm sorry. Okay, there. It's really hard because, you know, while they care about each other and they're inspired by each other's intellectual and creative and emotional energies, they also have a lot of conflict. They, because of Bismeeth's experiences, especially on the college campus with racism and classism, you know, she's understandably just very angry and very upset. She's really sick of being tokenized like a lot of the other Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. She's really developing a racial consciousness, and she gets really upset when Anna is just really defensive, really, you know, just really not recognizing her privilege enough. When she sometimes she just like makes fun of Bismeeth in these weird ways, doesn't understand her cultural heritage, you know, just all these kinds of things that maybe some of you can relate to. I don't know. And so what happens is that Bismeeth and Anna get into a lot of fights, and Bismeeth ends up screaming at Anna, yelling at her. And you know, and people in their dorms are noticing or complaining about it. There's a very real danger that, you know, that things could escalate. And so my question is, given this fictional example, which is maybe relatable, what should Bismeeth and Anna do? What should the larger college community do? You know, they both feel like they're wrong, they're crazy, they're doing things not ideally, but they don't know how to cope. They're really stuck in this trapped cycle. They love each other, but they don't know how to escape it. And so, you know, what do we do with that? Have you, maybe this is relatable to some of you, like, have you experienced these things? Is there a way to address conflict in these kinds of relationships without it being punitive? Like, I'm thinking if there was a Title IX process and Bismeeth got, you know, faced consequences for emotional and verbal abuse, which is a very likely scenario, especially for loud people of color who are too much on campus. You know, would that actually solve anything? Would that be fair? And on the other hand, what if Anna, you know, just she just internalizes this sense that she just has to be quiet, accept people yelling at her, you know, just shut down, that the way to acknowledge her privilege is to just be silent and not be understood in her own pain, you know, is that fair? So you know, I'm asking these questions to get us thinking, like, what kinds of interventions would actually work in this situation? Or how can you imagine, you know, in these kinds of relationships, how can you imagine a different way forward? So to that end, I'd like us to return to the Google Doc, which I will share again. So many things open. Anyway, okay. So think about what you already wrote, you know, about ways you felt wrong, shut down, crazy, and think about how that applies to this fictional example. And then think about what could it look like for both of these women to have their needs and wants met. And if you do relate to this example, feel free to share, anything that you feel comfortable with. How does it relate back to ways you might have felt stigmatized in relationships? It's also okay if you can't imagine a way forward. That could also be something to write. You could say that it just feels terrible. And yeah, so, and another thing to think about could be like, who do you sympathize with in the relationship? Both, one more than the other? Yeah, and why? What does that reflect about your own background? So, okay, so we'll take a few minutes. I know we don't have a lot of time, but we'll spend the last 5 minutes or so of this workshop discussing it. And again, this workshop isn't about finding total solutions, but I think it's useful to work through these exercises. Okay, so feel free to keep writing, but just for the sake of time, I was thinking we could talk about a few of these responses. Thank you again. This is amazing. Like I was really thinking like, will this example actually be relatable or understandable? And all of you are like proving that yes, this is something that people deal with all the time. And yeah, I mean, I'm wondering, okay, why don't we start with this response? I also sympathize much more with Bismeet. I think that the couple should break up, honestly. This doesn't seem like a healthy relationship for anyone involved. However, it really seems like Anna is putting Bismeet in this violent framing in response to Anna's white victimhood. Okay. For the person who wrote that, do you want to share anything more? It's totally fine if not, but I mean, I'm just really interested in this response. I feel like there's a lot to say about victimhood and how whiteness is just automatically positioned as innocence. And yeah, and I'm wondering, like, it seems like people are having different reactions, but there's another one here that says, in hearing this story, I relate to Anna. That's surprising because in my own relationship, I am Bismeet, expressing myself loudly in a way that could be scary or triggering and being frustrated by the other person's quietness. I want to be met in the loud place to work it out. But as the story was told, I understood why Anna shut down. And that's so interesting to me because, like, it seems like, so if we look at these two different responses, right, there's a sense of like, um one is like, one of these responses like, okay, this isn't going to work, and you know, there's just no way forward. But then this other response, it seems like there's this way that, I mean, for the person who wrote this, you, even though you feel more like Bismeet, you also relate to Anna. And I'm interested in that because I'm wondering, like, what happens, I mean, what choices do we make and when do we make those choices? And is there a way that the larger community could help make those choices? Like, like here, I think there was another response. Yeah, the first one under the question, the first question. I wonder if Anna and Bismeet can engage in an exercise with a therapist of finding words for the other's pain, and just like go into detail, sensory detail, and then come back, you know, record those feelings again. And I'm curious, like, what if there were like community initiatives, or yeah, couples therapy, absolutely, but also something wider on the on campus, you know, a university initiative that wasn't just like Title IX, or which Title IX is also really, really difficult to go through. So that's a whole other subject. But anyway, yeah, so what would it mean for like people in the community to come together and, you know, be like, okay, so how can we support both of these people and also help them, you know, also challenge them, like especially with Anna, like how can we challenge her and people like her to, you know, be able to recognize privilege without without feeling like it has to be all about guilt and shame? Or for Bismeet, is there a way to you know, to articulate and just really, yeah, like be sure in herself without having to lash out, you know? So okay, yeah. So it seems like, okay, someone is writing right now, like, okay, yeah, ending a romantic relationship doesn't mean that they fall out of community with each other. It just means that the specific relationship is over, but that they are hopefully in community with people outside of this dynamic who hold them accountable with love. I love this. Yeah, it's like, can that be possible? Are there other friends, other partners, you know, whether these two people remain together or not, like are there people who will be there to really hold them? And I guess this is something that I'm really wondering, I mean, I know we don't have time, but I guess what the note I wanted to end on was like thinking about what would it mean to actually have, you know, spaces to hold trauma, to hold all these different intersections that create craziness, so to speak, that create moments that feel so wrong in interpersonal relationships, that create lashing out, that create internalized guilt, shame, um, and yeah, like what is it just like that we need more individual or couples counseling, or is there something even more like bigger than that that can happen? Um, Someone else talked about the hidden nature of queer relationships. Yeah, like what if there's more visibility around queer and interracial relationships? What if there's more dialogue about that, more protesting against tokenization and microaggressions on campus? And it seems like people are relating to these problems around, yeah, okay, yeah. And it's like it's also about the history of, you know, not being asked or checked in with about how you feel and who you are. And yeah, I feel like I know that there's still so much we can say about this, but I wanted to introduce these ideas as a way of thinking, really thinking about harm in relationships, but also how part of the root of harm is these feelings of alienation, of selfhood, right? Like a feeling like if you're either independent, self-assured, all of that, or you're nothing. And when people come together in interpersonal relationships with this, you know, this internalized sense of alienation, which can be expressed in many different ways given their backgrounds, you know, it creates a lot of traumatic conflict often. And so I guess what I'd like to leave all of you with is thinking about just to think about these questions, or to ask each other, and maybe in your friendships, relationships, ask each other, you know, how are you feeling? What are you going through? What background do you come from? I mean, obviously these questions would have to be asked in the proper moment, the context, but you know, to actually pay attention to that, to actually yeah, to contemplate what healing could look like. And when you come across, you know, relationships, or you find yourself in relationships with a lot of conflict, like, is there a way to address that with compassion? I guess is my hope. I will say that I've really struggled in queer community for a very long time with these things, and I don't have answers, but if there's one thing that I'm thinking, it's just that I think maybe we need to redefine craziness. Maybe we need to figure out healing that is more interdependent. And yeah, anyway, so I'm out of time, but if anyone has any last minute thoughts, feel free to share.
You're welcome to put those last minute questions in the chat, but I want to take this opportunity before we log off to thank Shana for this amazing workshop and for just creating such a space for us to be vulnerable with ourselves and each other. I'm very, very grateful. It's a rare thing in the academy, frankly. So thank you for creating that space for us.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you, everyone. I really wish I could actually like see and meet all of you. There's so much I want to say and do, but yeah, feel free to reach out. Also, I'm going to put my email in the chat.
I'm going to ask Sam to once again put the link to the Open and Emergency Kit for people to sign up to pick up their copy. So please do so. Thank you. I want to honor people's time boundary, but thank you all for coming, for staying with the Open Emergency series. Stay tuned for more events in spring quarter. But in the meantime, be well, stay safe, take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones, be kind to others. Bye all.